Your Honor, with that, we call Robin Wheeler to the stand.
All right. Come around, Ms. Wheeler. You've been previously sworn. Mr. Gupta.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Good afternoon. I'm Robin Wheeler.
What do you do for a living, ma'am?
I'm a police officer over in Polk County.
Where do you live?
Right off of Clifton. It's just on the west side of town. My husband and I, we bought the house together about 10 years ago, right after I moved back home.
Who's your husband?
Jamie. Jamie Robinson. He was killed about a month ago.
What'd your husband do for a living?
Well, he was a police officer too. He worked for the MSPD, the state police. We met when we were working on a case together.
I'm approaching opposing counsel with a photograph that's been marked for identification as Exhibit 5. I'm approaching Ms. Wheeler with the same. Would Your Honor like a copy?
Please.
Ms. Wheeler, do you recognize the person in that photograph?
This is my husband. This is Jamie.
We offer Exhibit 5.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
When's the last time you saw your husband?
It's just last month. It's March 18th.
Before we talk about that day, I'd like to talk a bit more about your husband's job.
Okay.
What kind of work did he do with the MSPD?
Jamie was in the undercover operations division.
Do you know what he was working on at the time he died?
I do. He and I, we were on a joint task force together. It was the PCPD, where I work, with the MSPD, where Jamie worked.
What was that task force investigating?
Drug trafficking. We were investigating a supplier who goes by the name Malcolm.
Objection, Your Honor.
Grounds?
Lacks foundation.
Response?
Your Honor, we've laid more than enough foundation. Ms. Wheeler has already testified that she was part of that task force. She knows all of this through her personal knowledge.
Overruled.
Ma'am, you can continue.
So we were investigating the supplier who goes by the name Malcolm. They were selling everything from hard drugs like heroin to study pills on college campuses.
What were your roles on that task force?
Well, I mainly did surveillance, and Jamie went undercover at MSU, Midland State University.
Can you tell us whether the name Skylar Sinclair ever came up as part of that investigation?
Sure. Sinclair and his roommate, Alex Everett, they were two of the college students that we were investigating. Jamie had the lead on that.
What do you know about how your husband communicated with them?
Well, Jamie was undercover, so he was using an alias, Mickey Keenan. And he also had a dummy email account.
How'd you know that?
He showed me one of the emails.
I'm approaching opposing counsel with a document marked for identification as Exhibit 7. I'm approaching Ms. Wheeler with the same. Ma'am, what have I just handed you?
This is that email that Jamie showed me.
What address is in the to field of this email?
applefritta33 @gmail.com. That was Jamie's dummy account.
What about the from field?
Well, it says S. Sinclair at midlandstate.edu.
Who is the email addressed to and signed by?
Well, it's addressed to Mickey. That was Jamie's alias. It's signed Skylar.
And ma'am, what's the date on that email?
March 12th, 2016.
We offer Exhibit 7.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, it's admitted.
Ma'am, how'd you end up seeing this email?
I mean, it says, if you go to the cops, it will be your last act on this earth. I personally guarantee it. Jamie showed it to me 6 days before he died.
Ma'am, we need to walk through what happened on the day your husband died.
I understand.
When did you last see him?
It was a little before 10 p.m. I dropped him off at the Midlands Marina.
Why'd you go to the Midlands Marina?
Well, we were home and we were having a late dinner and Jamie's phone starts going off. So, you know, he looks at it and he goes in the next room and he comes back and he asks if I'll take him to the marina. So I did. I took him.
Where exactly did you drop your husband off?
The parking lot, right by the convenience store.
Did you see anybody else in that parking lot?
No, the marina's in the middle of nowhere. It was 10 p.m. at night. The parking lot, it was completely empty, except for one other car.
Do you remember anything about that car?
Well, sure. When you've been in office there as long as I have, your police brain never really turns off. Silver Honda sedan, had vanity plates, said MSU boss.
What happened after you saw that car?
Jamie got out of the car and he went into the store. And that was the last time I ever saw him.
What happened after you got home?
Pretty much the worst nightmare for anyone whose spouse works undercover. I opened my computer, and there Jamie was. Picture, real name, alias, everything, all over the news.
So what'd you do?
Well, I didn't know what to do. You know, part of me just wanted to get back in the car and drive back and go get him. But Jamie was undercover. He wasn't in uniform. I didn't want to make things worse, so I sent him a text. I told him to come home.
How'd your husband respond?
He never did. You know, a half hour goes by. An hour. 2 hours. Still nothing. 4 hours later, I finally got the call.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Wheeler, I'm very sorry for your loss. But I am going to have to ask you a couple of questions.
I understand.
On March 18th, when you dropped your husband off at the marina, you saw a silver Honda, right?
That's right.
It was parked outside of the convenience store.
Yes, ma'am.
You don't know who parked that car, do you?
No. I only know that the car was registered to Skylar Sinclair.
But Mrs. Wheeler, you don't know who drove the car to the marina that night, do you?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Earlier that evening, your husband told you that he was planning to meet with one of the students he was investigating. Isn't that true?
That's right, the college student.
You know that your husband was investigating 2 students. Isn't that true, Mrs. Wheeler?
Yes, ma'am.
Your husband was investigating Skylar Sinclair and Alex Everett. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
He didn't tell you which one of those students he was going to meet with, did he?
He didn't. He just said one of the college students.
Mrs. Wheeler, I'd like to talk about which student your husband might have been meeting with. You remember reading a warrant application that your husband wrote, don't you?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Would you recognize a copy of it if I showed it to you?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Let the record reflect I'm approaching opposing counsel with the warrant.
Yes, ma'am.
Would Your Honor like a courtesy copy as well?
Certainly. Thank you.
Mrs. Wheeler, what have I just handed you?
This is the search warrant that Officer Turner showed me when he interviewed me about Jamie's death.
The information contained in this warrant is consistent with what you knew about your husband's investigation. Isn't that true?
It's consistent with what Jamie had told me about it.
And this warrant hasn't been changed or altered in any way since you saw it, right?
It doesn't look like it, no.
Your Honor, at this time we move defenses 1 into evidence.
Well, the normal practice is to wait until the defense case to admit evidence, but do you have any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. We have several objections to the contents within this document.
Okay.
A previous judge has already ruled that it's not hearsay, but we do object to several statements. Specifically, in paragraph 2, there's hearsay within hearsay by statements from an informant. And in paragraph 3, we see that there's character evidence, and that we see that there's character evidence, Your Honor.
Your response?
We don't believe paragraph 2 is hearsay, but if it's easier for the court, we'd be happy to redact paragraph 2. And as for paragraph 3, I'd ask opposing counsel to clarify what the character evidence is that he's stating is present in this paragraph.
Mr. Gupta, would you be more specific?
Yes, Your Honor. Are we being heard constructively outside the members of the jury?
In theory, yes. Go ahead.
Your Honor, in paragraph 3, it says that my apologies. It's paragraph 2, Your Honor, that we object to character evidence, and paragraph 3 that we object to hearsay within hearsay.
Well, the hearsay objection has been resolved by counsel's stipulation to redact. What about paragraph 2? What
In
is it?
paragraph 2, the line specifically says that Malcolm's organization is suspected in a wide range of criminal activity, including the murders of Trinidad Martinez and Frank Kimball.
Well, I believe that's just a statement of fact. The objection's overruled.
Mrs.
Of course,
Wheeler.
the jury gets to decide whether or not that's true.
Certainly, Your Honor. Mrs. Wheeler, from the information contained in this warrant application, you know a little bit about the 2 students that your husband was investigating, don't you?
I only know what Jamie wrote in here and what he believed at the time.
Let's talk about what your husband wrote in here.
Counsel, before you go any further, you had asked to admit the exhibit. The exhibit is admitted.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about what your husband wrote in this application, Mrs. Wheeler. Your husband wrote that it was Alex Everett, not Skylar Sinclair, who hired him. Isn't that true?
That's what Jamie wrote.
It was Alex Everett, not Skylar Sinclair, who oversaw most of the drug transactions. Isn't that true?
That's what Jamie has here.
He also says that it was primarily Alex Everett, not Skylar Sinclair, who was in contact with Malcolm, right?
That's what Jamie wrote.
Malcolm, he's the biggest drug supplier in Midlands, isn't that true?
That's correct.
Your husband also writes that it was Alex Everett, not Skylar Sinclair, who was more wary of his role in the investigation. Mrs. Wheeler?
I guess that's what he believed at the time. Yes, ma'am, that's what he wrote here.
Your husband also writes that it was Alex Everett, not Skylar Sinclair, who was the mastermind of their drug operation. Isn't that true?
I guess that's what Jamie thought.
Thank you, Mrs. Wheeler. And again, I'm very sorry for your loss. Your Honor, at this time, permission to publish Defense Exhibit 1 to the jury.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mrs. Wheeler. If you want to hand one back to.
Or did you have an objection?
No, Your Honor.
Were you just eager?
No redirect examination.
All right.
May I approach the stand, retrieve evidence, and tender to the bench?
Yes, sir.
Darby Hobbs on the stand portraying Robin Reeler, Shrey Gupta from UVA with the direct, Sarah Cohen with the cross, and Josh, that was a very somber, low-energy way to kick off the trial.
It was not a lot of laughs there, not a lot of excitement. The witness was effective, a little bit of substance. I think more came out on cross than direct, though, I fear, for the UVA folks.